Hello class, we're back to give you a quick overview of Chapter 2. Basically, chapter 2 talks about the developmental stages or developmental tasks that families go through. And then also we're going to talk about the stage model because this chapter essentially focuses on the pros and cons of the stage model. First, with the developmental tasks, basically saying that all families go through very similar developmental tasks, and this being getting to a particular age where they move out, get married, have children, then those children move out, get married, have children. So even if people are from different cultures, there are certain developmental tasks that every family goes through based on marriage, based on procreation, etc. Now, when you take culture into effect, how and when those developmental tasks occur is going to be different. So, for instance, if you are in the Czech Republic, you don't move out of your family's household until you get married. So, if you don't get married until you're in your 20s or 30s, then you're not going to move out of your family household until then. Whereas in America, you will hear people typically talking about moving out when they're 18 or 21, etc. Also, the person or the family socioeconomic status may also impact their developmental tasks. So maybe a family doesn't want to have kids until they're financially stable, so they put off having kids. So that would change when that developmental task occurs. Also, if they're from a low SES and the kids go to work to help contribute to the family, so maybe they enter the workforce at a younger age than another family, that just means their developmental task of employment happens at an earlier stage, but they're still getting employment, which would be part of that developmental task. So it's saying that there are some components that all families are going to have in common, whether that's employment, marriage, kids, etc. And then there's the other perspective, the saying, really, can we say that these days, with so many different family dynamics, with so many divorces and remarriage and GLBT couples and people who don't want kids, adoption, infertility issues, etc. And some people say that it's too simplistic to say that there are any developmental tasks, and that basically sets a family up to feel like that they aren't achieving things by a certain time or aren't doing things on a particular schedule. The rest of the chapter talks a lot about stages, and I want you to make sure that you do take a look in your book. Your book has some great charts on the stages, basically saying, in this stage, this is these are the 5 or 3 components to look for. In adolescence, these are the 3 or 4 things you should look for. And what I want you to do is, when you're looking at those, I want you to compare and contrast to your own adolescence. Or any other stage, not just adolescence, but are there things that you remember from a particular stage you're like, oh, I also went through that? Or, no, I never really went through that, but I had a friend that did. So start thinking about how it applies to your life or somebody's life that you know. One, that'll help the information kind of stick in your brain, but it'll also help you apply the information. So that's the whole thing. It's not just about reading the chapter, but how would you apply it to your own life? And then even in a counseling setting, how would you apply it? So the book talks about different things that impact the stages. So, and can the stages, are they something that everybody goes through, no matter what the culture is, etc.? And it talks about trauma and how trauma can really change a particular stage. And so say, for instance, there was 3 teenagers and they had parents die in a car accident. That's obviously going to change how they progress through those particular stages, and even some of the developmental tasks, how that would look to them. So say if somebody was raped, it might change how they are intimate, when they become intimate, how they're able to connect to other people, maybe how they some of the things that they engage in adolescence, etc. So a lot of that can depend on what trauma occurred, when the trauma occurred, if they got treatment for that trauma, etc. Your book talks about vertical and horizontal stressors. With the vertical stressors, those are basically stressors that are handed down from generations. So kind of like the hand that we were dealt. So what can be included in this are bias or beliefs or discrimination, those sort of things. And then with the horizontal stressors, that's stuff that comes from the environment or some of those traumas that I was talking about before. But basically, all family is going to have different stressors. It is about how they overcome those stressors, that the earlier stressors, that's going to help them in the later stages. So say they had a stressor in early childhood, that's going to help them be more resilient, and if they navigated through that successfully, they're going to be able to use those skills to navigate through other stressors later on in other stages. So when you're thinking about this stage model, is it too simplistic? So when you're going through the stages and you're looking at the chart in your book, does everybody fit this chart? People from the Hiltons who are super rich, or I don't know, let's say Oprah had a child. Would they follow the same chart that somebody like myself, who is middle class, lives in Middle Tennessee, single parent household, are they going to go through the same stages? And what kind of things do you think impact these different stages? Do you think that it's stressors? What about drug and alcohol use? What about divorce? What about religion, access to resources? And thinking about when these particular stages were developed, how do you think technology is going to play a part when we start examining, how that is impacting these different stages as well? Are people being exposed to more at younger ages? Therefore, it is changing some of the behaviors with which that they engage. So just really thinking about, are these stages only made for the intact families? So husband, wife, 2.5 kids, and a dog. Or what about the grandparent families? What about the LGBT families and, other single parent families, etc.? So just something to think about. One of the interesting components of this particular chapter is there's, I think it's in a box, but talking about immigrant families, and 1 out of 5 people are from an immigrant family. And how do you think that impacts everything from communication to norms to how they interact? Maybe at home might be different than how they interact at school, and vice versa. And it gave some very interesting information on just thinking about how, we say immigrant as if it's one group of people, but obviously depending on where they migrated from, it's going to impact language, it's going to impact why they're dislocated, it's going to impact the support, their status, the trauma that they experienced before they migrated, and just thinking about how that will impact how we interact with different families. So ensure that you pay some special attention to make sure you're not skipping over those little boxes, because they do have important information in them. Then it talked about family developmental models are not linear. They are linear. The models are very linear. You move from this stage to this stage to this stage. But do families really work like that? And, if you do this by a particular age, well, what if the person has a disability? Say they have Down syndrome. That's going to look very different in adolescence than somebody who does not have Downs. So just making sure that, yes, it's important to know the stage models, but it's also important to think about What are the critiques of these models, and how would this work for the families? Don't throw it out, but at the same time, is this going to work for every family that I work with? So I want you to spend some time paying attention to the charts and comparing and contrasting it to your life and also other people that you know, and making sure that you're thinking about how you would apply this in a multicultural setting. And I think that is the basic highlights from this particular chapter, and I will be back to talk to you about chapter 3.